The noose they had prepared for Madison Gray was too thick. It hung heavy in her mind. A rough coil of hemp made for a warrior's thick neck, not for an Omega washerwoman whose wrists were currently chafing against cold. Silver chains. "Stop it, Sophie," Madison whispered, her voice cracking like dry parchment. "You have to stop crying. They'll hear you." In the cell next to hers, the sobbing didn't stop. It only turned into a wet, hiccuping gasp. Sophie Chen, 19 years old and terrified, pressed her face against the damp iron bars separating them. "I can't," Sophie choked out. "Maddie, the sun is coming up. I can see the light changing in the grate. They're coming for us." Madison shifted on the freezing stone bench. Her body ached. Every inch of her skin felt bruised, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the ice in her veins. She looked at her hands. They were trembling. "Don't let them see you shake," she told herself. "If you die standing." "Listen to me," Madison hissed, dragging herself toward the bars to lock eyes with her adopted sister. "You didn't do anything. I took the blame. When they take me, you scream your innocence. You tell them I acted alone. Do you hear me?" "But you didn't kill him," Sophie wailed, her voice rising dangerously high. "You didn't kill Draven. You were washing linens. You were—" "Quiet," Madison snapped, though her eyes softened. Heavy boots slammed against the stone floor down the corridor. Thud, thud, thud. The rhythm of an execution. Sophie scrambled back into the shadows of her cell, but Madison straightened her spine. She smoothed the tattered fabric of her gray dress, a ridiculous gesture given the filth of the dungeon, but it was all the dignity she had left. Guard Captain Morrow appeared first. He was a bulky beta with grease in his hair and a cruel slant to his mouth. He stopped in front of Madison's cell, rattling his baton against the bars with a jarring clang. "Morning, Princess," Morrow sneered. His eyes roamed over her, lingering on the curve of her neck, then dropping lower. It was a look that made Madison feel like she was covered in slime, ready to dance on air. Madison stared straight through him. "Is it time?" Morrow chuckled, a wet, ugly sound. "Almost. But the Alpha King wants a look at the prizes first. Wants to see the Omega who thought she could murder a royal advisor." He leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale ale and onions. "Shame to waste a pretty little thing like you on a rope. If you'd been nicer to me when I brought your water yesterday, maybe I could have put in a good word. Maybe found you a warmer position in the barracks." Madison's stomach churned. She stepped closer to the bars, her voice deadly calm. "I would rather rot in the ground than let a man like you touch me." Morrow's face darkened. He reached through the bars, his fingers snatching a lock of her hair, yanking her head back. Madison gasped, forced to look up at him. "Careful, washerwoman," he growled, "or I'll make sure your sister gets sold to the mining camps before your body is even cold." He released her with a shove. Madison stumbled back, catching herself against the wall. She touched her scalp, her heart hammering against her ribs. As Morrow marched down the hall to check the perimeter, Sophie scrambled back to the separating bars. "Maddie," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling with a new urgency. "I have to tell you, I was too scared before. But the night Draven died, I saw him." Madison frowned, rubbing her wrists. "Saw Draven. He was dead in our cabin. Sophie." "No, not Draven." Sophie shook her head frantically. "The man who killed him. The man who left the cabin before the guards came." Madison froze. "You saw the killer?" "I saw his hand," Sophie hissed. Checking over her shoulder, he paused at the door. He was wearing a ring, a silver serpent wrapped around a sword. It had a green stone. The air left Madison's lungs, a serpent and sword. "Yes." He looked right at me, Maddie, like he wanted me to see it. Madison's mind raced. That wasn't just jewelry. That was a crest, a noble's crest. But why would a noble frame a washerwoman before she could process it? The atmosphere in the dungeon shifted. The air grew heavy, charged with static electricity. The damp smell of mold vanished, replaced by the scent of ozone, pine, and something dark and purely masculine. Alpha, not just an alpha, the alpha. The heavy iron door at the end of the corridor creaked open. Morrow and the other guards snapped to attention, their backs rigid, heads bowed. King Cain Ashford walked in. He was massive. He had to duck slightly to clear the archway. He wore black combat leathers that strained against the muscles of his thighs and chest, a dark fur cloak thrown over one shoulder. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, messy, as if he'd run his fingers through it in frustration. But it was his eyes that pinned Madison to the wall. They were gray, swirling like a storm cloud about to break. He didn't look at the guards. He didn't look at Sophie. He walked straight to Madison's cell and stopped. The sheer power radiating off him hit Madison like a physical wave. Her knees weakened, her wolf, buried deep, dormant, and weak, whimpered in submission. But Madison bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted iron. She forced herself to meet his gaze. Cain stared at her. His expression wasn't angry, it was confused. "Open it," Cain commanded. His voice was a low rumble, a sound that vibrated in Madison's chest. Morrow fumbled with the keys. "Sire, she's dangerous. She killed." "Open the door." Cain didn't raise his voice, but the threat was unmistakable. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Cain stepped inside the small cell. The space instantly felt too small. He consumed all the oxygen in the room. He stepped closer to Madison, crowding her space, forcing her to tilt her head back to look at him. He was terrifying. He was beautiful. "You," Cain said softly, "are the monster who ripped out a beta warrior's throat?" "I didn't kill him," Madison said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. Cain took another step. He was so close now she could feel the heat radiating from his body. It was intoxicating. It smelled like rain and power. "Give me your hands," he ordered. Madison hesitated, then slowly lifted her chained wrists. Cain reached out. His fingers were large, calloused, and rough. He didn't take the chains. He wrapped his hand around her bare hands. His skin was scorching hot against her cold flesh. A jolt, like a spark from a fire, shot up Madison's arm. Cain flinched, his eyes widening slightly. He looked down at her hands. Turning them over, they were red, chapped from lye soap and hot water, calloused from scrubbing floors. They were not the hands of a warrior. His thumb brushed against the sensitive skin of her inner wrist, right over her pulse point. He lingered there, pressing gently. The touch was possessive, intimate in a way that made Madison's breath hitch in her throat. "So soft," he murmured, almost to himself. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could see the gold flecks in his storm-gray eyes. He inhaled deeply, as if scenting her. "You smell like lavender and fear." His gaze dropped to her mouth. For a second, the execution, the dungeon, the guards, it all faded. There was just the heat of his body and the heavy, magnetic pull between them. It was a hunger, a dark, dangerous hunger. Madison's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Are you going to kill me, Your Majesty?" Cain's eyes snapped back to hers. The spell broke, but the tension remained, thick and suffocating. He released her hands abruptly, stepping back. The loss of his heat made her shiver. "The evidence says you are guilty," Cain said, his voice hardening, "becoming the king once more. But my eyes tell me you couldn't crush a grape, let alone a beta's windpipe." "Then let us go," Madison pleaded. Cain's jaw tightened. "I cannot. The law is absolute. A life for a life. Unless—" He paused, looking her up and down, his gaze heavy and calculating. "Unless what?" "Unless you prove your nature," Cain said. "At dawn, in the courtyard, you will undergo a forced transformation. If you are a weak Omega, the shift will likely kill you. If you are a monster in disguise, the shift will reveal it. Madison gripped her locket, the only thing she owned. And if I survive? Kane turned to the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back at her over his shoulder. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes burned with that same dark intensity. If you survive, Madison Gray, he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper, then you become my problem to solve. He walked out, the heavy door slamming shut behind him. Madison sank onto the bench, her skin still burning where he had touched her. The grand courtyard of Valkest Castle was a sea of noise. Thousands had gathered. They spilled over the stone balconies, pressed against the iron barricades, and climbed the statues of ancient kings just to get a better view. The execution of a murderer was entertainment. The execution of a pretty young female was a spectacle. Dark clouds churned overhead, blocking out the sun, casting the world in a bruised, gray light. The wind whipped Madison's hair across her face as the guards dragged her to the center of the stone circle. She was barefoot. The stone was freezing against her soles. Move! Filth! Morrow grunted, shoving her forward. Madison stumbled but caught her balance. She stood in the center of the circle, alone. She could feel the eyes of the pack on her. Thousands of predators, watching, judging. Directly ahead, on a raised dais, sat the throne of Valkest. It was a monstrosity of black obsidian, carved with runes that hadn't glowed in 500 years, and sitting on it was King Kane. He looked like a god of war. He wore ceremonial armor, black on black, with a heavy fur cloak draped over the back of the throne. He sat with his legs spread, one hand gripping the armrest, his knuckles white. He wasn't looking at the crowd, he was looking only at her. Next to him, on a smaller velvet chair, sat Celeste Ravenswood. She was perfection sculpted in ice, blonde hair twisted into an intricate braid, lips painted a blood red, and a dress of white silk that cost more than Madison would earn in 10 lifetimes. Celeste leaned toward the king, whispering something in his ear, her hand resting familiarly on his armored forearm. Madison felt a spike of irrational, hot jealousy pierce her chest. She swallowed it down. Focus. You have to survive. Kane ignored Celeste. He stood up, and the crowd instantly went silent. The hush was absolute. Madison Gray, Kane's voice boomed, amplified by the acoustics of the courtyard. You stand accused of treason and murder. The punishment is death. However, you have been granted the right of truth. He stepped down from the dais, walking slowly toward the edge of the circle. He stopped 10 feet from her. Even at this distance, Madison could feel his presence. It pulled at her, a hook in her navel dragging her forward. Transform, Kane commanded. Show us what you are. I don't know if I can, Madison whispered. Omegas rarely shifted. It was too painful, too energy-consuming. Then you die, Celeste called out from the dais, her voice sweet and poisonous. Stop wasting our time. Kane, put the dog down. Kane threw a glare over his shoulder that silenced Celeste instantly. He looked back at Madison. His eyes were pleading now, warring with his duty. Shift. Madison. He growled low in his throat. Don't make me watch you die. Madison closed her eyes. She reached deep inside herself, past the fear, past the hunger, past the years of scrubbing floors until her knees bled. She found the small, trembling spark of her wolf. Help me. She begged it. Please. Pain exploded in her chest. It wasn't a slow ache. It was a sledgehammer. Madison screamed, falling to her knees. The sound tore from her throat, raw and agonizing. Look at her. Someone in the crowd laughed. She's breaking. Her bones snapped. The sound was like dry branches cracking in a fire. Shoulders, ribs, spine. Madison writhed on the stone, her vision going white. It felt like she was being torn apart from the inside out. But then, The pain changed. It shifted from agony to power, like lightning striking a rod. Heat flooded her veins, liquid, molten heat. Her skin felt too tight. A roar built in her chest, louder than her scream, deeper than anything human. She felt her body expanding, growing, stretching. Fur burst through her skin. It wasn't the patchy brown fur of an omega. It wasn't the gray of a common beta. It was silver, pure, blinding, moonlight silver. The crowd gasped. The sound rippled outward like a wave. Madison planted her front paws on the stone. She pushed herself up, and up, and up. She wasn't small. She was massive. She towered over the guards. Her fur shimmered as if it generated its own light. Her claws were black obsidian, sharp enough to carve stone. She shook out her coat, and silver sparks literally danced in the air around her. She lifted her massive head and howled. The sound wasn't a mournful cry. It was a song of war and stars. Then, a crack sounded like a gunshot. Everyone froze. Madison, now fully in her silver wolf form, turned toward the dais, the throne of Valkest. The ancient, indestructible obsidian throne had cracked down the center. From the fissure, a brilliant silver light poured out, blinding in the gloomy afternoon. The runes on the throne, dormant for centuries, flared to life, glowing in sync with the silver wolf's heartbeat. King Cain stood frozen. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. But then, his body betrayed him. A growl ripped from his chest, a sound so primal, so possessive, that the guards dropped their weapons and covered their ears. Cain's eyes flashed gold. His wolf was surfacing, clawing its way out, desperate, hungry, maddened. He vaulted over the barrier, landing in the circle with a heavy thud. He stalked toward the silver wolf, his breathing ragged. He didn't look like a king anymore. He looked like a mate claiming what was his. "Mine," he snarled, the word barely human. He reached out a hand toward Madison's snout. The silver wolf didn't flinch. She lowered her head. Pressing her nose into the king's palm, a shockwave of energy blasted outward from their touch, knocking the nearest guards off their feet. "Impossible," a voice croaked. From the crowd, an old woman in healer's robes stumbled forward. Her white hair was braided with silver threads. It was Meleus, the castle's oldest healer. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. "Silverborn," Meleus whispered, but in the silence, everyone heard her. The lost line, the queens of starlight. She looked up at Cain. "She isn't a murderer. My king. She's the heir we thought was dead." On the dais, Celeste stood up, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She gripped the railing until her knuckles turned white. "Kill it," she shrieked. "It's a trick. It's witchcraft. Kill the beast." Silence. Cain roared. The alpha command in his voice brought half the crowd to their knees. He didn't take his eyes off the silver wolf. He ran his hand through the thick, shimmering fur of her neck, his fingers burying deep. The connection between them was a live wire hot, wet, overwhelming. He could feel her fear, her confusion, and beneath it all, a power that matched his own. "Guards," Cain barked, his voice rough with emotion. "Clear the courtyard, seal the gates." He looked into the wolf's glowing violet eyes. "Take her to the royal tower," Cain ordered, though his hand lingered on her fur, as if he couldn't bear to break contact. "Put her in my chambers." He turned to glare at the stunned crowd, at the furious Celeste, at the terrified guards. "If anyone touches a hair on her head," Cain snarled, baring his teeth, "I will rip them apart myself." Madison, trapped in the massive silver form, looked at the man who had sentenced her to die an hour ago. Now. He stood between her and the world, a wall of black armor and fury, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a washerwoman. She felt like a queen. But as the guards moved to escort her, she caught sight of the cracked throne. The silver light was fading, But the crack remained. The kingdom was broken, and somehow she was the only one who could fix it. The stone walls of the royal tower were thick, but they couldn't block out the sound of Madison's own racing heart. She sat on the edge of a massive 4-poster bed that smelled of cedar, and King Cain, Melias, the ancient healer, sat opposite her in a velvet chair, her hands folded over a steaming cup of tea. "You have his eyes," Melias said softly. Her voice sounded like dry leaves scraping together. "King Aldrich's eyes. But you have your mother's chin. Stubborn." Madison touched the silver locket hanging around her neck. It felt warm, vibrating with a faint hum she had ignored her entire life. "I was a washerwoman yesterday, Melias. I scrubbed floors. I ate stale bread. Now you tell me I'm a princess of a dead bloodline." "Not dead," Melias corrected, leaning forward, hidden, 25 years ago. The purists came. They wanted a world where power was pure, where bloodlines didn't mix, and where omegas were slaves. Your father, King Aldrich Silverborn, believed differently. He believed in unity. Melias reached out, her wrinkled fingers brushing Madison's knee. They slaughtered everyone. Child. But your mother, Queen Lysa, she was clever. She gave you to me. I used the old magic to bind your wolf, to hide your scent, to make you appear as an omega. I placed you in the slums where no one looks twice at a dirty face. Madison's throat tightened. Why now? Why did the magic break? Because the throne of Valkest cracked, Melias whispered, her eyes gleaming. And because your mate found you, an alpha king's recognition is stronger than any concealment spell. Mate! The word hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. Before Madison could ask more, a sharp knock echoed on the heavy oak door. Melias vanished into the shadows of the room as if she were smoke. The door opened. It wasn't Cain. It was Celeste Ravenswood. She swept into the room flanked by 2 handmaidens who looked more like bodyguards. Celeste wore a gown of pale blue silk that clung to her curves like a second skin. She looked pristine, expensive, and utterly lethal. "Oh, look at you," Celeste cooed, though her eyes were cold shards of ice, playing dress-up in the king's tower. Madison stood up. She felt clumsy in the borrowed velvet robe. "What do you want?" "Celeste." Celeste waved a hand, dismissing the question. She circled Madison slowly, like a shark scenting blood. "I just came to welcome you." "Of course. It must be so overwhelming. One minute you're scrubbing Cain's underwear, the next you're sleeping in his bed. Though," she paused, wrinkling her nose, "I suppose he hasn't actually touched you yet. Cain has very particular tastes." "Get out," Madison said, her voice low. "Touchy." Celeste laughed. She stopped in front of a small table where a porcelain tea set rested. "I just wanted to give you some advice. From one highborn lady to well, whatever you are, a magical anomaly." Celeste picked up a cup of tea. She turned, feigning a trip, and splashed the hot, dark liquid all over the front of Madison's white robe. Madison gasped, jumping back as the heat scalded her skin. "Oh no!" Celeste cried, her hand flying to her mouth in mock horror. "I am so clumsy." "But then again, you're used to cleaning up messes, aren't you? It's what you were bred for." She leaned in close, the sweetness dropping from her voice, replaced by a hiss. "Do not get comfortable, mongrel. Cain is keeping you here as a curiosity, a science experiment, when he gets bored. And he always gets bored. You'll be back in the dungeons, and I will be the one holding the key." Celeste spun on her heel and marched out, her handmaidens giggling as they followed. Madison stood trembling, the tea staining her chest, tears of humiliation burning her eyes. She grabbed a towel, scrubbing furiously at the stain, hating herself for crying. Suddenly, the door flew open again. This time, the air in the room changed instantly. The temperature spiked. The scent of ozone and rain flooded the space. Cain stood in the doorway. He was breathless, his chest heaving beneath a white linen shirt that was unbuttoned at the top. He didn't speak. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. "Who hurt you?" Kane growled. It wasn't a question, it was a demand. "No one," Madison stammered. Backing away, "I spilled the tea. I'm clumsy." Kane stopped inches from her. He reached out, his large hand cupping her jaw, forcing her to look at him. His skin was scorching hot. His thumb brushed away a tear on her cheek. "Liar," he murmured, his voice rough. "I can smell her perfume on you. It smells like rot." He looked down at the stain on her robe, then at her red, tear-stained face. His pupils blew wide, swallowing the gray of his irises until his eyes were almost black. "Did she touch you?" "No," Madison whispered. Her heart was hammering against his chest. He was so close, too close. "Kane, please, you have to go," Celeste said. "I don't care what Celeste said." Kane interrupted. He slid his hand down her neck to rest on her shoulder, his grip possessive. "You are distressed. My wolf is tearing at the walls of my mind right now because you are distressed. Do you understand that?" Madison looked up at him, bewildered. "Why?" Kane let out a shuddering breath. He leaned down, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He inhaled deeply, his nose grazing her sensitive skin. Madison's knees buckled, but his arms shot around her waist, holding her up against his hard body. "Because..." Kane groaned against her skin, sending shivers down her spine. "You are the only thing in this castle that feels real." He pulled back, just an inch. His gaze dropped to her lips. The air between them crackled, thick with unspoken desire. He wanted to kiss her. She could feel the urge radiating off him like heat from a furnace, but he didn't. He clenched his jaw, physically restraining himself. "I will handle Celeste," Kane promised, his voice dark. "Wash your face, Madison, and lock the door. No one enters without my voice." He turned and stormed out, leaving Madison leaning against the wall, breathless and burning. Later that evening, after the sun had set, the door opened again, but it was a guard, escorting a small, terrified figure. Sophie Madison cried. The sisters collided in a fierce hug. Sophie was clean, dressed in simple but high-quality wool. She smelled like soap and safety. "They moved me." Sophie sobbed into Madison's shoulder, "to a guest room. They said I'm the sister of the princess. Maddie, is it true? Are you really?" "I don't know what I am," Madison admitted, pulling back to look at Sophie. "But you're safe. That's what matters." Sophie's face went serious. She fumbled in her pocket and pulled out a scrap of parchment. "Maddie, the ring, the one the killer wore. I drew it." She pressed the paper into Madison's hand. Madison smoothed it out on the table. It was a crude drawing, done with charcoal, but the details were clear. A serpent, coiled around a sword, with an emerald eye. Madison felt the blood drain from her face. She had seen this crest before, not in the dungeons, but in the history books Malleus had brought her. "The Ravenswood crest," Madison whispered. "Draven's family?" Sophie asked. "No," Madison said, her eyes widening in horror. "Draven was a Blackwell. This is Celeste's family crest. This is Marcus Ravenswood's sigil." The realization hit her like a physical blow. Draven wasn't killed by a stranger. He was killed by someone wearing the crest of the king's future father-in-law. And if the Ravenswoods killed Draven, they were cleaning up loose ends. Madison looked at the door Kane had just walked through. "He doesn't know," she whispered. "He's surrounded by vipers." The training yard was secluded, hidden behind the high walls of the eastern barracks. The ground was packed dirt, smelling of dust and dried pine needles. "Focus, child," Malleus instructed. She stood near the wall, leaning on a gnarled staff. "The silver isn't a weapon you swing, it's a river you guide. Let it flow." Madison stood in the center of the yard, wearing leather training gear that felt strange after a lifetime of rags. She closed her eyes, trying to call the wolf. It was right there, scratching at the surface. Since the transformation in the courtyard, her wolf was restless. It wanted out. It wanted to run. It wanted Kane. It hurts. Madison gritted out. Her bones ached with the pressure of the shift. Pain is the price of power, Melia said simply. Madison pushed. She felt the silver light bubble up in her chest. Her skin began to glow, faint lines of luminescence tracing her veins. Her fingernails lengthened into obsidian claws. Just as she was about to shift, the heavy wooden gate to the yard banged open. Madison's concentration shattered. The silver light flared violently, blinding her for a second. 3 young men, minor nobles by the look of their velvet doublets, stumbled in, laughing loudly. They froze when they saw her, but they didn't look surprised. They looked prepared. "Well, well," one of them sneered. He was a lanky boy with a cruel face. Celeste was right. The mongrel is playing warrior. "Get out," Milius barked, moving faster than an old woman should. "This is a closed session." "King's orders," the boy lied smoothly. "He wants to know if the bitch can fight." He picked up a stone from the ground and hurled it. It struck Madison square in the forehead, a sharp sting. Warm blood trickled down into her eye. The world went red. Madison didn't think. She didn't decide. The wolf took over. With a snarl that sounded like tearing metal, she exploded into motion. The shift happened mid-air. 1 second, she was a woman. The next, she was a 7-foot silver wolf, crashing into the lanky boy. He screamed as he went down. Madison stood over him, her massive jaws snapping inches from his face, saliva dripping onto his velvet collar, her claws dug into the dirt on either side of his head. "Help murder!" the boy shrieked. "Oh my gods!" The voice was high, theatrical. Celeste Ravenswood appeared at the gate, flanked by a dozen guards she had conveniently brought with her. "She's killing him," Celeste screamed, pointing a manicured finger. "Stop her! She's feral!" The guards raised their crossbows. 2 bolts hit the dirt inches from Madison's paws. She scrambled back, shifting painfully back into human form, naked and shivering in the dust, covering herself with her arms. "I didn't," Madison gasped, spitting dirt. "He threw a stone." "Silence," Celeste commanded. She looked at the guards. "You saw it. She attacked an unarmed noble. She's unstable, a danger to the crown." The guards looked uncertain, but the evidence was damning. The boy was bleeding from a scratch on his cheek, sobbing on the ground. Madison was wild-eyed and bloody. "Escort her to the tower," a guard captain said grimly. "Lock her down." Hours later, the tower room was dark. Madison sat on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the moon. She had failed. She had let Celeste bait her. She was exactly what they said. She was a dangerous animal. The lock on her door clicked. Madison flinched, expecting guards. Kane slipped inside. He locked the door behind him and leaned against it, breathing hard. He was still in his formal court clothes, but his tie was undone, his collar open. "Did you hurt him?" Kane asked into the darkness. Madison swallowed. "I didn't mean to. He threw a rock. My wolf. She just reacted." Kane pushed off the door. He didn't turn on the lights. He walked to her, guided by the moonlight and his own superior sight. He sat down on the floor right in front of her, his long legs stretching out on either side of hers. I questioned him. Kane said quietly, "I used my alpha voice. The boy wet himself." Madison looked up, surprised. He admitted it. Kane continued, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "Celeste paid him. She told him to provoke you. She had the guards waiting." "You believe me," Madison whispered. Kane reached out in the dark. His hand found hers under the blanket. He interlaced their fingers, palm to palm. The jolt of electricity was stronger this time, a steady, thrumming beat that synced their pulses. "I felt your fear," Kane said. "Through the bond, I was in a council meeting, and suddenly I couldn't breathe because you were panicked." He pulled her hand up, pressing her knuckles against his lips. His mouth was hot, wet and incredibly soft against her skin. "They want me to exile you," Cain murmured against her hand. "The council says you are a threat. Celeste says you are a monster." "Maybe I am," Madison said, her voice trembling. "No." Cain shifted, moving closer until his chest brushed her knees. The scent of him wrapped around her, making her head spin. "You are the Silverborn, and you are mine." "Cain," she breathed, "you're betrothed to her." "A political arrangement," he spat the words out like poison, "made by my father before he died. I never wanted her. I never felt this with her." He released her hand and cupped her face with both hands. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, his touch reverent. "Do you feel it? Madison, this pull. It's not just magic, it's biology. My wolf recognizes you. He wants to tear down the world just to build a safe place for you to sleep." Madison's breath hitched. She leaned into his touch, starving for it. "It scares me." "Good," Cain whispered, leaning in until their foreheads touched. His eyes were glowing gold in the dark. "It scares me too. It should terrify us. But I am not letting you go." He tilted his head, his lips hovering millimeters from hers. The tension was unbearable. A pulled bowstring waiting to snap. "Let them scheme." Cain growled low in his throat. "Let them try to break us. I will burn this castle to the ground before I let them put chains on you again." He closed the distance. His lips brushed hers, a feather-light touch that sent a shockwave through Madison's entire body. She gasped, opening to him, and he groaned. A deep, guttural sound of want. He didn't kiss her fully. He savored the contact, the friction, the heat. He nipped at her lower lip, soothing the bite with his tongue. It was wet, desperate, and overwhelmingly intimate. Madison's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, messy. Cain tasted like wine and danger. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. Cain pulled back instantly, his head snapping toward the door. His eyes were fully gold now, his lips swollen, his chest heaving. "Someone is there," he hissed. He stood up in one fluid motion, moving silently to the door. He yanked it open. The hallway was empty, but on the floor, lying on the stone, was a single white rose. The petals had been crushed under a boot heel. Cain stared at it, his fists clenching. He picked it up and sniffed it. "Celeste," he snarled softly. He turned back to Madison, his face grim. The romantic haze had vanished, replaced by the cold look of a king at war. "She knows," Cain said. "She saw me leave. She knows about the bond." Madison stood up, wrapping the blanket tighter around herself. What will she do? Cain crushed the rose in his fist, the petals falling like drops of blood. "She will try to kill you," Cain said, "but she has made a fatal mistake." "What?" "She thinks she is fighting a washerwoman," Cain said, walking back to Madison and kissing her forehead fiercely. "She doesn't know she just declared war on the Alpha King." The sacred chamber smelled of beeswax and old iron. It was a room buried deep beneath the castle, a place where the air felt thick enough to chew. In the center of the room, Melias placed a small crystal vial on a silver pedestal. Inside, a drop of crimson liquid swirled with pearlescent light. "Blood memory," Melias whispered, her hands trembling slightly. "The blood of Queen Lysa, preserved in the locket you wore for 25 years. Madison stood before it, her hands shaking. Cain stood directly behind her, close enough that his chest brushed her back. His heat was the only thing keeping her upright. "You don't have to do this," Cain murmured into her ear. His voice was a low rumble, vibrating through her spine. "We can find another way to prove Draven's guilt." "There is no other way," Madison said. Leaning back against him, she could feel the hard ridge of his muscles, the steady, heavy thud of his heart. It calmed her. "I need to know. Cain, I need to see how they died." "I will be right here," Cain promised. He wrapped his arms around her waist, locking his fingers over her stomach. I will be your anchor. If you get lost in the vision, follow my voice home. Madison took a deep breath. She reached out and uncorked the vial. She tipped the single drop onto her fingertip. The moment the blood touched her skin, the stone room vanished. The world tilted. Color bled out of the walls. Madison wasn't Madison anymore. She was Queen Lysa. She was running. Her lungs burned. She clutched a bundle of blankets to her chest, a baby, herself. "Run!" Lysa King Aldrich shouted from the end of the corridor. "Go!" But the doors ahead burst open. Men in dark armor poured in, and leading them wasn't a stranger. It was a young man with a handsome, cruel face, Draven Blackwell. No loose ends. Draven smiled. He raised a sword. The steel was wet. The scene fractured. Shards of memory sliced through Madison's mind. Now she was King Aldrich, standing in the throne room. Marcus Ravenswood stood before him, his face twisted in a sneer. "The hierarchy is nature's law, Aldrich," Marcus spat. "You weaken us with your mercy." "Mercy is strength," Aldrich replied calmly. Then, movement in the shadows. Draven again. He slipped behind the king. A dagger flashed silver coated in green poison. It slid between Aldrich's ribs with a sickening wet thud. Madison screamed, but it was a silent scream in a dead man's throat. The scene shifted one last time. A smaller room, a private study. A man sat by the fire. He looked like Cain, but older, harder. King Roland Ashford. Draven was pouring wine. "The Silverborn are dealt with," Draven said smoothly. "The threat to your dynasty is gone. Your Majesty." King Roland took the cup. "A tragedy," he said, "devoid of emotion, but necessary. If the Silverborn live, the Ashfords cannot rule alone." Roland drank. He wiped his mouth. Seconds later, he gasped. The cup fell. Foam gathered at his lips. Why, Roland choked out, clawing at his throat. Draven stood over him, watching him die with cold curiosity. "Because, Your Majesty, Marcus Ravenswood prefers a king who is dead, and a prince who is too young to question his advisors." Madison. The scream ripped her back to reality. Madison collapsed, her knees hitting the stone floor. She was sobbing, gasping for air as if she'd been drowning. Cain was there instantly. He pulled her into his lap, cradling her head against his chest. "I saw them," Madison wept, clutching Cain's shirt. "Draven killed them all, my mother, my father." She looked up, her eyes wide and haunted. "And yours?" Cain froze. His hand halted where it was stroking her hair. "What?" "Draven poisoned your father," Madison whispered. "King Roland. He agreed to the massacre. He let my family die. But then Draven killed him to silence him." Cain went perfectly still. The silence in the room was suffocating. Then, a growl started in his chest. It wasn't human. It was the sound of a tectonic plate shifting. "My father." New Cain's voice broke. The pain in his eyes was devastating. He let them slaughter children. "He thought he was protecting his crown," Madison said softly. Cain shut his eyes tight. A single tear leaked out, tracking through the stubble on his jaw. He looked shattered. The powerful Alpha King, brought to his knees by the sins of his bloodline. "I am the son of a monster," Cain whispered. "No," Madison said fiercely. She shifted in his lap, straddling him, ignoring Malleus and the guards. She cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. "You are the man who saved me. You are the man who is going to fix this." The bond between them flared hot, urgent and healing. Cain's eyes snapped open, glowing gold. He didn't speak. He surged forward and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision. He devoured her, his tongue sweeping into her mouth, tasting her grief and her strength. His hands gripped her hips, bruisingly tight, anchoring her to him. Madison kissed him back just as hard, her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. For a moment, there was no conspiracy, no murder. There was just the wet heat of their mouths, the friction of their bodies, and the undeniable truth that they belonged to each other. Cain pulled back, breathless, his lips red and swollen. He rested his forehead against hers. "We end this," Cain growled. "Tomorrow, the council. We burn them all down." The next morning, the council chamber was a powder keg. Cain stood at the head of the long table. He looked exhausted but lethal. Madison stood at his right hand, dressed in simple black, her silver hair braided like a crown. "We have seen the truth," Cain announced, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "The blood memory confirms it. Draven Blackwell murdered the Silverborn family. He murdered King Roland. He has been working with Marcus Ravenswood for 25 years to destabilize this kingdom." The council members murmured, glancing nervously at one another. "This is grave news," Commander Torrin said, his hand on his sword hilt. "If true, it is high treason." "It is true," Madison said, her voice steady. "I lived it." Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the chamber banged open. A hush fell over the room. Draven Blackwell walked in. He wasn't in chains. He wasn't hiding. He was wearing the pristine white robes of a high priest. He looked calm, almost bored. A blood memory, Draven laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally. A parlor trick, a hallucination induced by a witch. Cain snarled, stepping forward. "You have some nerve showing your face here, Blackwell." Draven didn't flinch. He smiled a cold, reptile smile. "I am here to save you, Your Majesty," Draven said, addressing the council, ignoring Cain completely. "This female, this creature, has bewitched the king. She is using ancient blood magic to twist his mind. She claims I am a murderer. I am the one who kept the peace while the king played with his new pet." "Arrest him!" Cain roared. But the guards hesitated. They looked from the furious king to the calm high priest. Draven's smile widened. "You see, even your own men doubt you, because they know the truth. The Silverborn are dangerous. And He paused, looking directly at Madison. "I am the only thing standing between order and chaos." Madison felt a chill run down her spine. He was too confident. He walked in here knowing he would be accused. How? She looked around the room. Her eyes landed on advisor Helena, the quiet scribe in the corner. Helena was staring at the floor, her hands trembling, ink staining her fingers. A spy. Draven knew everything because someone in this room had told him. "Take him," Cain bellowed, his patience snapping. The air pressure in the room dropped as his alpha aura exploded outward. That is a direct command. The hesitation broke. Commander Torrin drew his sword, guards secure Blackwell. Draven's smile vanished. His eyes went flat and black. "Fools." Draven spat. He moved with unnatural speed. He didn't run for the door. He didn't attack Cain. He lunged straight for Madison from beneath his white robes. He drew a jagged, curved dagger that dripped with a dark, viscous liquid. "If the vessel breaks," Draven hissed, "the magic dies." He was too fast for a human. He was enhanced by dark sorcery. Cain shouted, leaping over the table. But he was too far away. The dagger slashed through the air, inches from Madison's throat. Time slowed down. Madison saw the blade. She saw the madness in Draven's eyes. She saw Cain midair, his face twisted in terror. Something inside her snapped. It wasn't the wolf. It was something older, something that lived in the blood of kings and queens. She didn't dodge. She planted her feet. She opened her mouth. "Stop." The word didn't sound like her voice. It sounded like 1,000 voices speaking in unison. It reverberated through the stone floor, shaking the dust from the chandeliers. It hit Draven like a physical wall. He froze mid-strike, his arm locked in the air, the dagger trembling inches from her neck. His eyes bulged, veins popping in his forehead as he fought the command. Every person in the room dropped to their knees. Even Torin, even the guards, even Kane stumbled, catching himself on the table, looking at her with awe. Madison's skin was glowing. The silver lines on her arms flared brilliant white. Her eyes were solid pools of mercury. She walked toward Draven. With every step, he winced, forced down by the crushing weight of her silver command. "You thought I was weak," Madison said, her voice layering over itself, echoing. "You thought you could hunt me." Behind her, a deep, grinding noise filled the room. The throne of Valkest, which sat on the dais behind the council table, groaned. Everyone turned to look. The crack that had appeared during her first shift was widening. A beam of silver light shot up from the stone, piercing the ceiling with a sound like thunder. The massive obsidian throne split in two. It didn't break. It multiplied. The black stone shifted, reforming into a sleek, sharp throne of midnight iron. Next to it, shimmering into existence from the light itself, a second throne appeared, pure silver, carved with vines and stars, 2 thrones. The prophecy, Melius gasped from the doorway. The dual crowns, shadow and starlight. Draven screamed. The sight of the prophecy fulfilling itself broke his concentration. With a surge of dark, corrupted strength, he shattered the hold of Madison's command. "No," Draven roared, slashing wildly. Madison stumbled back, the magical backlash disorienting her. Draven raised the dagger again, poised to strike, but a shadow eclipsed him. A massive black wolf slammed into Draven, jaws clamping down on his shoulder. Kane. The impact sent them both crashing into the stone wall. Kane shook his head violently, tearing flesh. Draven shrieked. Dropping the dagger, Kane didn't let go. Tame. He dragged Draven to the center of the room and pinned him. A massive paw on Draven's chest, he snarled, saliva dripping onto Draven's face. His jaws opened wide enough to take the traitor's head off. "Kill him," the bond sang. "Protect her." Madison stepped forward. She placed a hand on the massive wolf's neck. "Kane," she said softly, "don't." The wolf froze, looking up at her with wild gold eyes. "We need him alive," Madison said. "We need him to confess. If you kill him now, he becomes a martyr." Kane hesitated. He looked at Draven, then at Madison, slowly, reluctantly. The wolf stepped back. Kane shifted, bones cracking and reshaping until he was a man again, naked and breathing hard, blood on his mouth. He grabbed a cloak from a guard and wrapped it around his waist. He hauled Draven up by the throat and threw him at Torin's feet. "Take him to the deepest cell," Kane rasped. "If he speaks to anyone other than me, cut out his tongue." "Where is?" Celeste Madison asked suddenly, looking around the chaotic room. The chair next to Kane's was empty. She ran, Torin reported, looking grim. During the fight, guards are pursuing. "Find her," Kane ordered. 2 hours later, the chaos had settled into a grim resolve. Marcus Ravenswood and Celeste were captured in the lower tunnels, trying to flee with chests of gold. They were dragged back to the throne room in chains. Marcus looked defeated, his age showing for the first time. But Celeste was unrepentant. She stood before the 2 thrones, the black and the silver, and laughed. It was a brittle, jagged sound. "Look at you," Celeste sneered at Madison, sitting on a chair made of light. "You think this changes anything. You are a freak, an abomination." "And you," Madison said calmly, sitting on the silver throne. It felt warm against her back, humming with a familiar energy, "are an exile." Kane sat on the black throne beside her. He reached out and took Madison's hand. The image of them together, darkness and light, warrior and mage, was striking. "Marcus Ravenswood," Kane announced, his voice cold. "You are stripped of all titles. You are branded a traitor. You will rot in the darkness you love so much. And Celeste, Madison added, looking at the woman who had tormented her, you are banished. If you step foot in Valkest again, the penalty is death. Celeste's eyes narrowed. You'll regret this. You think you've won. This is just the beginning. As the guards dragged her away, Celeste twisted around, locking eyes with Madison. She mouthed 3 words that made Madison's blood run cold. There are others. The heavy doors slammed shut. Silence fell over the throne room. Kane turned to Madison. He squeezed her hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles. It's done, he said quietly. No, Madison replied. Looking at the closed doors, she felt the heavy weight of the silver crown that Malleus was bringing toward her. She felt the new life of the kingdom stirring. No, Kane, she whispered, leaning her head on his shoulder. The war has just begun. But as he leaned over and kissed her, softly, reverently, right there on the throne, Madison knew one thing for certain. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. And for the first time in 25 years, the Silver Wolf wasn't alone. The bells of Valkest City rang until the air itself seemed to vibrate. Inside the grand coronation hall, the sound was muffled by thick velvet tapestries and the murmurs of 1,000 guests. Madison stood before a tall mirror in the anteroom. She barely recognized herself. The woman reflecting back wasn't the washerwoman with chapped hands. She wore a gown woven from white silk so fine it looked like spun moonlight, threaded with real silver that caught the candlelight. Sophie stood behind her, adjusting the hem. You look... Sophie swallowed, tears welling in her eyes. You look like a queen, Maddie. I feel like an imposter, Madison whispered, touching the silver paint marking the center of her forehead. You're not, Sophie said fiercely. You saved us. You broke the curse. The heavy oak doors creaked open. Kane stepped inside. The breath left Madison's lungs. He was magnificent. He wore formal military dress, black tunic with gold embroidery, heavy epaulets, and a cape of midnight velvet. But it wasn't the clothes. It was him. The way he filled the doorway. The way his gray eyes softened the moment they landed on her. Leave us, Kane murmured to Sophie. Sophie curtsied and slipped out. Kane crossed the room. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of Madison. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. Are you ready? He asked, his voice low and intimate. Terrified, Madison admitted. Good. Kane smiled, a rare, genuine expression that made him look younger. Only fools aren't scared of a crown. It's heavy. He leaned down and kissed her. It was slow, reassuring. He tasted like mint and nerves. I have something for you. Kane pulled back. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a ring. It wasn't a delicate band. It was heavy gold, set with a massive black diamond. The Ashford family ring. This belonged to my mother, Kane said, sliding it onto her finger. It has protected the queens of Valkest for 6 generations. Now it protects you. Madison looked at the ring, then up at him. And what protects you? Kane took her hand and placed it over his heart, beneath the heavy fabric. She could feel the steady, powerful thud. You do, he said simply. The ceremony was a blur of light and sound. Malleus, looking ancient and powerful in ceremonial robes, placed the heavy black iron crown on Kane's head. The sapphires glowed blue. Then, she turned to Madison. She lifted a delicate circlet of woven silver, set with moonstones and diamonds. As the silver crown settled on Madison's head, a shockwave of energy rippled through the hall. The silver throne hummed in resonance. Malleus turned to the crowd. I present to you the dual monarchs, King Kane of House Ashford, Queen Madison of House Silverborn. The silence stretched for a heartbeat. Then, Kane raised Madison's hand high. My mate, he roared. Long live the Queen! Sophie screamed from the front row. The crowd erupted, even the skeptics, swept up in the energy, cheered, but amidst the celebration, Madison saw faces that didn't smile, older nobles, traditionalists, men who looked at her silver hair with suspicion and hate, and as she scanned the crowd, her eyes locked with a guard escorting a prisoner out a side door. Celeste. Celeste wasn't looking at the floor. She was looking right at Madison. She wasn't crying. She was smiling. A cold, knowing smile. "This isn't over," her expression said. Later that night, the royal bedroom was quiet. The sounds of the feast drifted up from the courtyard. But in here, it was just the crackle of the fire. Madison sat on the edge of the bed, taking the heavy pins out of her hair. Her scalp ached. Her feet ached. Kane came up behind her. He didn't speak. He just started massaging her shoulders, his thumbs working deep into the tension knots. "Better," he murmured into her hair. Madison leaned back against him. "You have magic hands." "Wolf strength," he chuckled. He kissed the sensitive spot behind her ear, and a highly motivated desire to please my mate. He turned her around. His eyes were dark, dilated. He pulled her up, his hands sliding down to rest on her hips. "I've waited 25 years for you," Kane whispered. "I didn't know it was you I was waiting for, but my soul knew." He kissed her, and the playful mood vanished. It was deep, hungry. He walked her backward until her legs hit the mattress. They fell onto the bed together, a tangle of silk and limbs. The mating bond sang between them. It wasn't just physical pleasure, it was a spiritual merging. When he touched her skin, she felt his love, his fear, his overwhelming need to protect her. When she kissed his throat, she felt him shudder with the sheer relief of having her safe. For hours. The world outside didn't exist. There were no plots, no poisons, no cracked thrones, just Kane, just Madison, just the firelight and the silver moon watching through the window. The next morning, reality returned with a vengeance. A messenger arrived at breakfast, pale and breathless. "Your Majesties," he gasped, bowing low. "Trouble in the southern provinces." Kane put down his coffee cup. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by the steel of the Alpha King. "Report." "A woman," the messenger said. "She claims to be a Ravenswood. She's gathering an army. She calls herself the True Heir." Madison felt her blood run cold. "Sienna," she whispered. Kane looked at her sharply. "Who?" "Celeste told me," Madison said, gripping the edge of the table. "Before she left, she said she had a sister, a twin, hidden away." The messenger nodded nervously. She looks exactly like the Lady Celeste, sire, but different, harder. She wears armor, not silk. And the people, they are listening to her." Kane stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. "Prepare the war room," he commanded. "Now." The war room smelled of parchment and aggression. A massive map of the kingdom was spread across the central table. Commander Torrin placed a red marker on the southern border. "Here," Torrin said grimly. "Fort Ironside. It's a stronghold. Sienna Ravenswood took it 3 days ago without spilling a drop of blood." How Kane demanded, pacing the length of the room like a caged tiger. "Ironside is loyal to the crown." "She didn't fight them," Torrin explained. "She talked to them. She told them the king has been bewitched by a silver-born witch. She told them the new laws giving rights to Omegas are weakening the pack. She's using fear. Sire." Madison stood by the window, looking out at the gray sky. "She's smart. She knows she can't beat you in a duel, Kane, so she's trying to beat you in the minds of the people." "Propaganda," Kane spat. "Coward's weapon." "Effective weapon," Madison countered. Turning around, the Northern Lords are already grumbling about the Omega decree. If Sienna offers them a return to the old ways, they might join her. "Then we crush her," Cain growled. I will march south with the royal guard. We will end this rebellion before it starts. No, Madison said. The room went silent. Torrance' eyes widened. No one contradicted the Alpha King in his war room. Cain stopped pacing. He looked at her, his eyebrows raised. No. If you march south with an army, you prove her point, Madison said. Walking to the table, she placed her hand on the map. You look like a tyrant crushing dissent. You look afraid. I am not afraid, Cain said dangerously. I know. Madison softened her voice. But the people don't know you like I do. They see a king who killed his own advisor. They see a queen who appeared out of nowhere with magic they don't understand. She looked up at him. We can't fight this with swords, Cain. We have to fight it with truth. And how do we do that? She wants a challenge, Madison said, a cold determination settling in her chest. Let's give her one. Invite her here, to the capital, for a parley. She's a traitor, Cain argued. We don't negotiate with traitors. Not to negotiate, Madison corrected, to expose her. Let the people see the difference between a queen who heals and a pretender who hates. Cain stared at her for a long moment, then, slowly. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. You are dangerous, my love, he murmured. 2 weeks later, Sienna Ravenswood arrived. She didn't come quietly. She rode into the city at the head of a column of 200 soldiers, wearing black armor that mirrored Cain's. Her hair, identical blonde to Celeste's, was pulled back in a severe warrior's braid. She didn't look like a court lady. She looked like a general. The throne room was packed. Nobles, merchants, and commoners crowded the galleries. Tension was thick enough to choke on. The double doors opened. Sienna marched in. She didn't bow. She stopped 10 feet from the dual thrones and stood with her legs apart, hand resting on the hilt of her sword. King Cain, she said. Her voice was deeper than Celeste's, raspy and commanding. She ignored Madison completely. I have come to offer you a way out, Sienna announced, her voice carrying to the back of the room. The Ravenswood family has served the crown for centuries. My father was a patriot. My sister was your betrothed. I am here to restore the natural order. You are here, Cain said, his voice ice cold from the black throne, because I allowed it. Do not mistake my patience for weakness. Sienna. Sienna smiled. It wasn't a pretty smile. It was a baring of teeth. And you. She finally turned to Madison. Her eyes were full of unmasked loathing. The washerwoman queen. Tell me, do you use a spell to keep his bed warm, or just standard Omega tricks? The court gasped. Madison felt Cain tense beside her. The air pressure dropped. His wolf was about to surface. Madison placed a hand on Cain's arm, restraining him. She stood up slowly. The silver crown caught the light. You speak of order, Sienna, Madison said calmly, but you bring soldiers into a city of peace. You speak of tradition, but you insult your queen in her own home. That is not strength. That is insecurity. Sienna's jaw tightened. I am a warrior born. You are a mistake of history. Then prove it, Madison challenged. A duel, Sienna laughed. I would snap you in half, little wolf. Not a duel of muscle, Madison said. A duel of power. Madison stepped down from the dais. She walked toward Sienna. The guards tensed, but Madison waved them back. She stopped inches from the armored woman. You claim to represent the strength of this kingdom, Madison said. Show me. Sienna frowned, confused. What? Heal him. Madison pointed to a guard standing nearby, an older man with a heavily scarred face and a limp from an old war wound. I am not a healer, Sienna scoffed. I am a killer. Exactly, Madison said. She turned to the guard. She placed her hand on his bad leg. She closed her eyes. She pulled on the silver river inside her. Flow. Silver light poured from her palm. It soaked into the guard's leg. The man gasped, his eyes widening. There was a wet, shifting sound, the old, Twisted bones straightened, the scar tissue dissolved. Pain lines vanished from the man's face. Madison stepped back. The guard stood straight. He stomped his foot, disbelief washing over his features. He fell to his knees, weeping. "Thank you, my queen. Thank you." The court was silent, absolute, stunned silence. Madison turned back to Sienna. "Any wolf can kill," Madison said softly, her voice ringing in the silence. "That is easy. Building, healing, that is hard. That is what a queen does." Sienna's face was red with fury. She had been outmaneuvered. She looked like a brute standing next to a miracle. "This is a trick," Sienna shouted, pointing at Madison. "Witchcraft. She weakens our warriors by making them soft." But the crowd wasn't listening to her anymore. They were looking at the guard. They were looking at Madison with awe. Sienna realized she had lost the room. "Enjoy your applause," Sienna snarled, leaning in close to Madison. "But magic doesn't stop steel. You better watch your back. Princess, the shadows have teeth." She spun around and marched out, her soldiers scrambling to follow. As the doors closed, Kane stood up and joined Madison. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "That was brilliant," he whispered. "She's not done," Madison murmured, shivering despite his warmth. "She's angry, and she has help." "Help." "I felt it," Madison said, touching her locket. "When I was close to her, she smelled like ozone and old blood." She looked up at Kane, fear finally creeping into her eyes. "Kane, she smells like Marcus, like he's not gone, like he's still here." Later that night, miles away in a hidden camp, Sienna Ravenswood stormed into her tent. She ripped off her gauntlets and threw them across the room. "She humiliated me," Sienna screamed. A figure sat in the corner, shrouded in shadows. He didn't move. "Patience, daughter," the voice rasped. It was dry, like old parchment. Marcus Ravenswood stepped into the dim light. He looked older, weaker, but his eyes burned with a fanatical light. The girl revealed her hand. Marcus said, "She relies on the people's love. Love is fickle. Fear is constant." "I want her dead," Sienna hissed. "You will have her," Marcus promised, "but not yet. We need her blood. The ritual requires it fresh." He placed a hand on Sienna's shoulder. "The creatures are ready." Marcus smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "Open the borders. Let the darkness in. Let's see how much she can heal when the nightmares come to eat her precious subjects." The rain in Valkes didn't just fall. It hammered. It turned the cobblestone streets into rivers and drummed a frantic rhythm against the windows of the royal tower. Kane sat at his desk, staring at a letter. The paper was heavy, expensive vellum. The handwriting was jagged, angry. "He's alive," Kane said, his voice void of emotion. Madison looked up from the book she was reading by the fire. "Who?" "My uncle," Kane replied. He pushed the letter across the desk. "Everett Ashford, the man who taught me how to hold a sword, the man we buried 5 years ago after a hunting accident." Madison picked up the letter. Her eyes scanned the words. "Your father was weak, Kane. He let the kingdom soften. He let Omegas forget their place. I stepped into the shadows to prepare for the day a true king was needed. That day is now. Step aside, nephew, or I will remove you." "He's with Sienna," Madison realized, looking up. The support she mentioned. It's him. He brings legitimacy to her cause. "He brings an army," Kane corrected. "Everett commanded the Northern Legions. Those men are loyal to him personally. If he calls them—" "Civil war," Madison finished. Kane stood up and walked to the window, watching the storm. "My own blood. First my father betrays your family. Now my uncle betrays me. Maybe the Ashfords don't deserve this throne." "Stop that," Madison said sharply. She crossed the room and turned him around. "You are not them. You broke the cycle. That makes you stronger, not weaker." "Does it?" Kane asked. his eyes tormented. Or does it just make me alone? You're never alone, Madison said, placing her hand over his heart. We are the dual monarchs. Remember Shadow and Starlight? Kane covered her hand with his own. I'm going to have to fight him. Madison, I might have to kill him. Then we do it together, she promised. The next morning, the mood in the castle was grim. Intelligence reports were flooding in. Several northern provinces had declared neutrality, which in wartime meant they were waiting to see who would win. But the worst news came from the east. Strange creatures, Commander Torin reported, pointing to a map. Here, near the Blackwood Forest. Villagers say they look like wolves, but wrong, twisted, shadows that move on their own. Marcus, Madison whispered. He's opening doors that should stay shut. We are fighting a war on 3 fronts, Kane summarized, rubbing his temples. Sienna and Everett in the south, Marcus's monsters in the east, and political dissent right here in the capital. We need to know what they're planning, Malaya said from her corner. We are reacting, not acting. We need eyes inside their camp. We had a spy, Kane growled. Helena, and we found her. Not a coerced spy, Madison said thoughtfully. A defector. Someone who is there, but doesn't want to be. She looked at Sophie, who was quietly polishing a dagger in the corner. Sophie had changed. The terrified girl was gone. In her place was a young woman with steel in her spine. The messages mentioned a lieutenant, Sophie said without looking up. Lieutenant Garrett. He's Torin's second in command, but he's been hesitant. I've seen him questioning orders. Torin bristled. Garrett is loyal. He saved my life at the Battle of Red Ridge. Loyalty changes when the world does, Sophie said calmly. Check his quarters. Torin looked furious, but Kane nodded. Do it. An hour later, Torin returned. He looked pale. He placed a stack of letters on the table. He's been writing to his brother, Torin said, his voice hollow. His brother is in Everett's personal guard. Garrett has been feeding them our troop movements. Kane slammed his fist onto the table, cracking the wood. Another traitor. Is there anyone in this castle I can trust? He says he did it to prevent bloodshed, Torin added quietly. He thought if Sienna won quickly, fewer people would die. He believes the Omega Decree is going to destroy the military hierarchy. Bring him to me, Kane ordered. The interrogation was short. Garrett didn't deny it. He knelt before the black throne, head bowed. I didn't do it for gold, sire, Garrett said. I did it because I believe in the pack, and a pack needs an alpha, not this. He gestured vaguely at Madison. Madison stood up. She walked down the steps. Garrett flinched, expecting a blow. You think I make the pack weak? Madison asked. Omegas are nurturers, Garrett said stubbornly, not warriors. It's nature. Nature evolves, Madison said, or it dies. She placed a hand on his shoulder. She didn't use Silver Command. She just let her aura flow warm, steady, unyielding. You betrayed your king, Madison said. But you did it because you love your country. That is the tragedy of this war. Garrett, good men making bad choices. She turned to Kane. Don't kill him. Kane looked at her, shocked. He's a spy. Imprison him, Madison said. But let him see. Let him watch what we build. Let his punishment be the realization that he was wrong. Kane stared at her for a long moment. The bond hummed between them, her mercy balancing his justice. Take him away, Kane ordered. As guards dragged Garrett out, Kane looked at Madison with a mixture of awe and frustration. You are going to be the death of me, woman. Or the saving of you, she smiled faintly. That night, the alarm bells rang. Not the invasion bells, the magic bells. The perimeter wards of the castle were screaming. Madison woke up gasping. They're here! Kane was already out of bed, grabbing his sword. Who? The shadows, Madison said, clutching her chest. I can feel them. They're cold. So cold. They ran to the ramparts. The storm had passed, leaving a heavy fog, but moving through the fog were shapes. They looked like wolves, but they were huge. Their eyes burned with unnatural green fire. Their bodies seemed to smoke, shifting in and out of reality. Shadow stalkers, Mylius gasped. Arriving beside them, demons summoned from the void. Only silver hurts them. The creatures hit the outer wall. They didn't climb. They phased through the stone like it was water. Screams erupted from the barracks below. "They're inside," Torin shouted. "Defensive positions." Kane looked at Madison. "Can you fight?" Madison felt the fear clawing at her throat. She wasn't a soldier. She was a washerwoman who got lucky. But then she looked down at the courtyard. She saw young guards being tossed aside by the shadow monsters. She saw Sophie running into the fray with her dagger. The fear vanished. Rage took its place. "I don't have a choice," Madison said. She closed her eyes and let the wolf out. Shift. The silver light exploded on the ramparts, blindingly bright. The massive silver wolf leaped from the wall, landing in the courtyard with a crater-cracking impact. She roared a sound of pure starlight. The shadow stalkers flinched. The light burned them. Madison lunged. She tore into the nearest shadow creature, her obsidian claws, charged with silver magic, sliced through the smoke flesh. The creature shrieked and dissolved into ash. "It works," she realized. "I am the weapon." Kane landed beside her in his massive black wolf form. Together, they became a whirlwind of destruction. Black and silver, teeth and magic, they fought back to back. Kane took the brunt of the physical attacks, his armor-like fur deflecting claws, while Madison delivered the killing blows with her magic for an hour. The courtyard was a slaughterhouse. Finally, the last shadow creature dissolved. Silence fell. The air smelled of ozone and rot. Madison shifted back, collapsing onto the cobblestones, naked and shaking. Kane shifted instantly, wrapping his cloak around her, pulling her into his arms. "You're okay," he chanted, kissing her blood-streaked face. "You're okay." "Marcus is testing us," Madison gasped. "He wanted to see if I could fight." "And you showed him," Kane said fiercely. "No," Madison whispered, looking at the ash piles. "He wanted to see if I would tire. And Kane, I am exhausted." The attack changed everything. The castle was no longer a home. It was a fortress under siege. "We cannot wait for them to come to us," Kane declared in the war room the next morning. "Marcus will keep sending these monsters until we are too weak to fight the human armies." "We have to strike the source," Mylius agreed. "The stone circle, the ancient site of power in the east. That's where he's summoning them." "But if we march east," Torin argued, "Everett and Sienna will march north and take the capital." "We split the forces," Madison said. She pointed to the map. "Torin, you take the main army south. Hold the line at the river. Do not attack, just hold them." "And you?" Torin asked. "We go east," Kane said. "A small strike team, elite guard only. We cut off the head of the snake." "It's a trap," Sophie said from the corner. "You know it's a trap, right? Marcus wants you there. He wants Maddie." "I know," Madison said quietly, "but the trap is the only way to get close enough to kill him." Preparations began immediately. Madison found Sophie in the armory, sharpening her blade again. "You're coming with us," Madison said. Sophie looked up, surprised. "Me, I'm not elite guard." "You have the blood," Madison said. "Mylius told me. You're not silver-born royalty, but you have the latent magic. We might need every drop of silver we have." Sophie swallowed hard, then nodded. "I won't let you down." Later, in the royal chamber, Kane was packing supplies. He looked grim. "You know what Marcus wants," Kane said without turning around. "The ritual. He wants to drain you. If we go there, we are walking you right onto his altar." "I have a plan," Madison said. Kane turned. A plan. A counter-ritual, Madison explained. Malleus found it in the archives. It's dangerous. It requires us to bind our life forces together completely, not just as mates, but as magical conduits. And if Marcus tries to drain me while we are bound, he won't just get my power, he'll get yours too. He'll get the power of the Alpha King. Kane frowned. That sounds like giving him exactly what he wants. No. Madison stepped closer. He's expecting a cup of water. We're going to give him a tidal wave. He won't be able to hold it. It will destroy him. And if it destroys us first, Kane asked softly, then we die together, Madison said, like we promised. Kane stared at her. The love in his eyes was so intense it hurt. He pulled her into a crushing hug. I hate this, he whispered into her hair. I hate that you have to be the hero. I'm not the hero, Madison mumbled against his chest. I'm just the girl who refuses to go back to the cage. That night, they performed the binding ritual. It wasn't done in a grand temple. It was done in their bedroom, with Malleus chanting softly by the fire. They knelt facing each other, naked, holding hands. Malleus painted runes on their chests with a mixture of crushed herbs and silver dust. This will hurt, Malleus warned. She began to chant. Pain flared in Madison's chest, a burning, searing heat right over her heart. She gasped, squeezing Kane's hands. Kane grunted, his muscles locking up. The world dissolved into white light. Madison felt the boundaries of herself dissolve. She wasn't just Madison anymore. She was Kane. She felt his childhood loneliness. She felt the crushing weight of the crown. She felt his fierce, terrifying love for her, and he felt her. Her years of hunger, her shame, her hidden strength. They merged. When the light faded, they were both gasping, sweating, lying on the floor. Kane looked at her. His eyes were different now. They swirled with flecks of silver amidst the gold, and when Madison looked in the mirror later, her violet eyes had a ring of storm gray. I can feel you, Kane whispered, touching his chest. You're in here, all the time. And you're in me, Madison replied. It was intimate. It was terrifying. It was absolute. The next morning, the strike team assembled in the courtyard. 10 elite guards, Sophie, Malleus, Kane, Madison. They wore light armor, built for speed. We ride for the stone circle, Kane commanded, mounting his massive black warhorse. As they rode out of the city gates, thunder rumbled in the distance. The sky was turning a sickly green in the east. The storm wasn't gathering anymore. It was here, and somewhere in that green darkness, Marcus Ravenswood was waiting. The journey to the stone circle was a nightmare. The land itself seemed to be rejecting them. Trees twisted into grasping claws, mud turned to quicksand, and every night, the shadows came. They fought skirmish after skirmish. They lost 2 guards to a pack of corrupted wolves. Sophie took a slash to the arm but refused to stop, binding it with a strip of her cloak. On the 3rd day, they saw it. The stone circle. It stood on a barren hill, a ring of massive standing stones that looked like jagged teeth against the sky. The air above it swirled with a vortex of green energy. He started, Malleus said, her voice tight. The barrier between worlds is thinning. They dismounted. Kane drew his sword, a massive blade of Valerian steel. We go in hard, Kane ordered. Guards, keep the creatures off us. Sophie, Malleus, you protect the perimeter, Madison and I. We take Marcus. They charged up the hill. The ground shook. From the earth, skeletal hands erupted, clawing at their boots. Shadow stalkers materialized from the air. The battle was instant chaos. Kane was a whirlwind of steel, cutting a path through the monsters. Madison ran beside him, using blasts of silver light to vaporize anything he missed. They breached the circle of stones, and there he was. Marcus Ravenswood stood in the center, floating a few feet off the ground. He looked monstrous veins bulging black against pale skin, eyes completely white. Beside him, shackled to a stone, was a figure. Draven, Madison gasped. Draven Blackwell looked broken, emaciated, terrified. He was being used as a battery, his life force fueling the ritual. "Welcome, your majesties," Marcus boomed. His voice sounded like grinding stones. "You are just in time for the finale." "It's over," Marcus Kane shouted. "Step down." Over Marcus laughed. "I am about to become a god." He raised his hands. The green vortex descended. It struck Madison like a physical blow. She fell to her knees, screaming. The pull was irresistible. It was trying to rip the silver magic right out of her soul. Madison Kane lunged for her. "No," Madison shouted, grabbing his hand. "The plan. Do it now." Kane understood. He didn't try to pull her away. He grabbed her hand and pushed. He shoved his own power, his alpha dominance, his life force, everything, down the bond and into her. Madison became a conduit. She channeled Kane's power, mixed it with her own, and fired it straight back at Marcus. A beam of blinding white gold light erupted from Madison's chest. It hit Marcus square in the chest. Marcus's eyes widened. Too much, he screamed. "It's too much." The power overloaded him. His body began to crack, light spilling out of his seams. The green vortex shattered with a sound like a nuclear detonation. The energy exploded. Madison woke up ringing. The silence was deafening. She was lying on the grass. The sky was blue. The green storm was gone. She sat up, panicking. "Kane." Here, a rough voice groaned. Kane was lying a few feet away, covered in soot, but alive. He crawled over to her. They collapsed into each other's arms, weeping with relief. "We did it," Kane choked out. "We actually did it." The stone circle was rubble. In the center, Marcus Ravenswood lay motionless. He wasn't dead, but he was shriveled, powerless, a husk. Guards were rushing up the hill. Sophie was there, hugging them both, but as they celebrated, a faint sound came from the rubble. Draven. He was alive, barely. Madison crawled over to him. She placed a hand on his chest, sending a pulse of healing warmth. Draven's eyes fluttered open. He looked at her, not with hate, but with clarity. The madness was gone. Draven whispered, blood bubbling on his lips. He wasn't alone. Madison leaned closer. Who? Draven, who helped him. Draven gripped her wrist with surprising strength. The traitor, Draven gasped, in the north. It wasn't Everett. Who was it? It was... Draven's eyes rolled back. He convulsed once, then went still. Madison looked at Kane. The victory suddenly felt cold. He said it wasn't Everett. Madison whispered. Then, who is leading? The Northern Army, Kane asked, dread pooling in his stomach. Just then, a messenger hawk swooped down, landing on Torrin's shoulder. Torrin took the scroll, read it, and went pale. Sire, Torrin said, his voice shaking. Urgent message from the capital. What is it? The Northern Army isn't attacking, Torrin said. They've bypassed the capital. They're marching here, toward the stone circle. Kane stood up, scanning the horizon. There, in the distance, a massive dust cloud was rising, thousands of troops, and leading them, riding under a banner of a broken crown, wasn't Everett Ashford. It was a woman. Kane squinted. Is that... Madison's heart stopped. It's not Sienna, Madison whispered. Sienna is in the south. The woman riding at the head of the army had blonde hair. She wore silver armor, and she looked exactly like Sienna and Celeste. 3, Madison realized, horror washing over her. Celeste said others, not another. Triplets. Kane breathed. Marcus hid 3 daughters. The third sister raised her sword. The army roared. They hadn't won. They had just survived the opening act. The dust cloud settled, revealing the army in stark, terrifying detail. Thousands of soldiers stood silent on the plain. Their armor glinted under the harsh sun, and at the front, the third sister sat atop a white warhorse. She was identical to Celeste and Sienna in bone structure, but her presence was entirely different. She didn't have Celeste's vanity or Sienna's rage. She had a cold, empty stillness that was far more unsettling. She wore silver armor, unadorned by any crest. "I can't fight an army." "Madison," Kane whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion. He gripped his sword, his knuckles white. "I'm spent, and you're barely standing." Madison leaned against him, her legs trembling. The magical backlash of defeating Marcus had left her hollowed out. "We don't run. If we die on our feet." The third sister kicked her horse forward. She rode alone. No bodyguards, no weapons drawn. She stopped 20 feet from where Kane and Madison stood, amidst the rubble of the stone circle. She looked down at the broken body of Marcus Ravenswood. She stared at him for a long time, her face unreadable. "Then Yeeson?" She looked at Madison. "Is he dead?" the woman asked. Her voice was soft, melodic, like a lullaby sung in a graveyard. "He is broken," Madison answered, stepping out from behind Kane's protective arm. "His magic is gone." The woman nodded slowly. She reached up and removed her helmet. Her blonde hair spilled out, matted with sweat. "I am Seraphina," she said, "the one he kept in the dark." Kane tensed. "Are you here to finish his work?" Seraphina let out a short, dry laugh. She dismounted, her boots crunching on the gravel. She walked over to Marcus's unconscious body. Without a word, she spit on him. "Finish his work," Seraphina looked up, her eyes burning with a lifetime of cold hatred. "I am here to bury it." She turned and signaled to the army behind her. 2 soldiers dragged a man forward from the ranks. He was bound in heavy iron chains, gagged, and looking furious. Everett Ashford. Kane's eyes widened. "Uncle?" "I intercepted his legion 3 days ago," Seraphina explained calmly. "My soldiers, mercenaries my father paid for but never bothered to meet, are loyal to gold and strength. I offered them both. Everett offered them nothing but rhetoric." She shoved Everett toward Kane. The traitorous uncle fell to his knees in the dirt. "Marcus locked me in a cellar for 20 years, Seraphina said, her gaze drifting back to her father. "He called me his fail-safe. He planned to drain me if Celeste failed to seduce the king and Sienna failed to conquer him. I was cattle to him." She looked at Madison. "You broke him. For that, I give you this army, and I give you the traitor." The tension broke. Kane let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for days. He sheathed his sword. "What do you want in return?" Kane asked. Seraphina looked at the horizon, her expression empty. "I want to disappear. I want to go somewhere where the name Ravenswood means nothing." "Done," Madison said instantly. "You have the crown's protection and a royal pardon." Seraphina mounted her horse again. She looked at her sisters. Celeste was missing. Sienna was in the south. Tell Sienna she was the lucky one. Seraphina murmured. "She only had to fight for him. I had to live with him." She turned her horse and rode away, not looking back once. Kane looked down at his uncle. Everett glared up at him, muffled shouts coming from behind the gag. "Get him out of my sight." Kane ordered the guards. "Take him to the Capitol. He stands trial for treason." Madison felt her knees give way. She slumped, darkness edging her vision. Kane caught her before she hit the ground. He scooped her up into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "It's over," Kane whispered into her hair, rocking her gently. "Madison, look at me. It's over." Madison rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She looked at the ruin of the stone circle, at the rising sun breaking through the storm clouds. "Take me home, Kane," she whispered. 1 month later, the great hall of Valkest was transformed. The weapons were gone from the walls, replaced by banners of silver and black. The air smelled of roasting meat, wine, and winter flowers. It was the festival of unity. Madison sat on the silver throne. She wore a gown of deep midnight blue, her silver crown gleaming. She looked healthy, the hollowness of the battle gone, replaced by a radiant glow. Cain sat beside her. He couldn't take his eyes off her. Every time she shifted, his hand moved to touch her. The possessiveness hadn't faded. It had just softened into constant adoration. The doors opened. Sienna Ravenswood walked in. She wasn't in chains. She wore a formal tunic of gray wool. She walked with a limp, a souvenir from the Southern campaign, but her head was high. The room went quiet. Sienna stopped before the thrones. She didn't bow, but she nodded respectfully. "Your Majesties," Sienna said. "Sienna." Madison greeted her warmly. "Thank you for coming." Sienna looked uncomfortable. "I'm not used to parties. I prefer mud." "We have a job for you," Cain said, leaning forward. "The southern provinces need a governor, someone strong, someone they respect, someone who knows the terrain." Sienna blinked. "You want me to rule the South?" "You gathered an army there in 2 weeks." Cain shrugged. "You're a natural leader. Just try not to start a rebellion this time." Sienna looked at Madison. For the first time, the hardness in her eyes cracked. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "I can't promise anything," Sienna said, "but I'll try." She bowed, deeply this time, and retreated. Next came Draven. He looked older. His hair had gone completely white from the trauma of the ritual. He wore the simple robes of a scholar. "I have finished the cataloging. My queen," Draven said, his voice quiet. "The dark books Marcus used. I have burned them, all of them." "Good," Madison said. "And your penance?" "I will serve in the archives," Draven said. Looking at the floor, "I will record the true history. I will write down every name of the Silverborn who died. I will make sure no one forgets." "See that you do," Cain said sternly. As the music started and the court began to dance, Cain stood up. He offered his hand to Madison. "Dance with me, wife." Madison took his hand. He pulled her up, and instead of leading her to the floor, he pulled her out to the balcony. The night air was crisp below. The city was lit by thousands of lanterns. It looked like a sea of stars. Cain wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. They swayed gently to the muffled music. "We did it," Cain murmured. "Peace." "For now," Madison said, leaning back into him. "Malleus says peace is just the breath between wars." "Malleus is a cheerful woman," Cain chuckled. He turned her around, his hands resting on her hips. His expression grew serious. "Madison, there's something different about you, since the ritual." "I know." She smiled. "I feel full, like there's a second heartbeat." Cain froze. His eyes dropped to her stomach. He went completely still, his breath catching. "Madison," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I felt it this morning," she said, tears pricking her eyes. "Life, a new pack." Cain dropped to his knees. The great Alpha King, the scourge of the North, knelt on the stone balcony and pressed his face against her stomach. He wrapped his massive arms around her waist, holding her as if she were made of glass. He let out a shuddering breath, and Madison felt his tears soak through the silk of her dress. "A pup," he choked out. "Our pup." Madison ran her fingers through his dark hair. "We're going to be parents. Cain, are you ready?" He looked up at her, his gray eyes shining with fierce, overwhelming joy. "I will build a world worthy of them," he vowed. "I promise you." 1 year later, the nursery was painted in soft hues of gray and violet, in 2 wooden cribs. The future of the kingdom slept. Lysa, the eldest by 4 minutes, had tufts of black hair and eyes that were already turning a piercing silver blue. She was quiet, watchful. Aldrich, the younger, had hair like spun silver and eyes of storm gray. He was loud, demanding, and already trying to climb out of his crib. Madison stood over them, rocking gently. She looked tired but content. The door creaked open. Meleus hobbled in, leaning heavily on a new cane made of weirwood. "They are strong," the old woman croaked. "The magic in them. It is dense, like a neutron star." "They are trouble." Madison laughed softly. "Aldrich bit Cain yesterday, in wolf form." "Good," Meleus cackled. "Keep the alpha humble." The old woman moved to the window, looking out at the kingdom. "You asked me once," Meleus said, her voice turning serious. "If it was destiny—" "I remember," Madison said. "It wasn't," Meleus admitted. She turned to look at the queen. "I chose your adoptive mother because she was distant kin to the Silverborn. I chose the day to reveal you. I chose the path." Madison stiffened slightly. "You manipulated us." "I guided you," Meleus corrected. "But the love, the bond, the way you forgave your enemies, that was all you. Child, the prophecy was just words. You made it real." She walked to the door. "My watch is ended. Madison, the shadows are gone for now. But remember, light casts the deepest shadows. Teach them well." Meleus left. A moment later, Cain entered. He had soot on his cheek and smelled of smoke. Fire in the kitchen, Madison guessed. "Small one," Cain grinned sheepishly. "I tried to cook. Again." "Stick to ruling, my love," Madison teased. Cain walked over to the cribs. He stared down at his children with a look of terrifying tenderness. He reached out a finger, and little Lysa grabbed it in her sleep, holding on tight. Cain looked at Madison. "I received a report from the east today. The strange creatures. They're gone. But the scouts found something written on the stones where Marcus fell." "What did it say?" "One word," Cain said darkly. "Beginning." Madison felt a flicker of cold fear, but she pushed it down. She looked at her husband, at her children, at the silver moon rising outside the window. She walked over to Cain and took his hand. The mate bond hummed between them, a fortress, a shield, a promise. "Let them come," Madison whispered, her eyes glowing with a faint, dangerous silver light. "We are the dual crowns, and we are ready." Cain smiled, his wolf rising to the surface, golden and fierce. "Yes," he agreed, pulling her close. "We are